Good morning to everybody around the world, and welcome to the 2022 IPRG conference. Modern medicine obviously is in a crisis, and my feeling is that Propolis could make a significant contribution towards that. Whether it can or not depends on a number of factors, and the word sustainability is right in the middle of that. So I want to address that question immediately. What is sustainability? Well, I think it's the ability to sustain. It's the ability of a process or a system to sustain itself without compromising its long-term health or viability. And these systems can be environmental, social, human, or economic. So what I want to do is I want to address 4 questions about sustainability. I want to ask the question, what is a sustainable medicine? Secondly, is Propolis sustainability for the honeybee? Thirdly, is Propolis a sustainable medicine for human beings, for man? And finally, if Propolis does become a much more popular and sustainable medicine for human beings, will that end up being sustainable for the honeybee? So what is a sustainable medicine? Well, Hippocrates said, primum non nocere, first do no harm. He also referred to medicine as an art, not as a science, as an art. And he said that it consisted of 3 elements: the disease, the patient, and the doctor. And in a way, those 3 elements relate to the kind of 3-dimensional quality of medicine. The disease is the physical or environmental element, the patient is the social or emotional element, and the doctor is the cultural or spiritual element. And the human body is 3-dimensional too. You know, as well as thinking, feeling, and willing in those realms, we have a nervous system, a respiratory system, and a metabolic system. This is where I really sort of become engaged with the central idea in my own mind, because in this sense, the immune system is also 3-dimensional. We know this because if we have physical trauma, our immune system goes down. If we have emotional trauma, our immune system goes down. And if we have existential trauma, then also our immune system goes down. And I'd just like to very briefly explore a way in which I think someone has so to speak, engaged with this, albeit potentially unconsciously, with this kind of 3D system. And it's a book called Radical Remission. And Kelly Turner looked at 1,000 cases that had been determined by the doctors as being terminal cancer, all of which underwent a kind of radical remission. And she identified 9 key factors that she said made a real difference. And it's interesting how those 9 factors break down, because they break down into 3 categories, into the physical, social, and spiritual. So in the physical, there's radically changing your diet, using herbs and supplements and so on, taking control of your health. In the social area, there's like releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, embracing social support. And in the spiritual dimension, there's following your intuition, deepening your spiritual connection, and having strong reasons for living. So 3-dimensional medicine is, in my book, immune support medicines. And these are pro-medicines. They're not anti-medicines, as we'll come on to, but they're pro-medicines. They're natural, they do no harm, they're appropriate, they're balancing, they protect the long term, they're multidimensional, they're related, they're holistic, they're integrated. These are the values that correlate with sustainability. So sustainability, these kind of medicines are sustainable because they have the ability to sustain your system, to do no harm, and to protect the future. Of course, modern medicine, we know, is a miracle. There's no two ways about that. Its ability to intervene with disease is extraordinary. But modern medicine is basically a battle against disease. It's a battle against germs. It's anti-medicine. It looks to be anti-inflammatory, antibiotic, antifungal, antiviral. It's quick acting, it's targeted, and it's symptom related. But over and above, it's an anti-medicine, and it's one dimensional because it's basically physical. You can tell it's physical. Here's a definition from the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Agency. Any substance or combination of substances that may be used or administered to human beings with a view to restoring, correcting, or modifying a physiological function. That's it. It's a substance. That's what a medicine is. That's not the definition that Hippocrates gave it, and I don't think it's the definition we should be looking for in the future. I don't think it's a definition of a sustainable medicine. So, modern medicine, yes, a miracle, but there has been a price to pay. And one of the key prices that we have to pay, which is very much in the news at the moment, is antibiotic resistance. This was a recent post by the BBC, how antibiotic resistance could take us back to the Dark Ages. Antibiotic resistance, you can see even up to 2017, steadily going up. A recent publication said that there were 4.9 million deaths due to antibiotic resistance worldwide in 2019. It's a big problem. The other problem, which is kind of related to that in some way, is the problem of etiogenic disease, a term I think coined by Ivan Illich back in the 70s. It's disease caused by previous medical treatment. Now, we've reached a critical point. I think the emergence of COVID has in many ways sort of woken us up to certain things. It's also switched us on to certain things, particularly in relation to medicines. But one of the things that it's really sort of told us about is that the elephant in the COVID infected room really is our immune system. This is the human facility that perhaps we should be supporting more than any other. But are we doing this? Are we relating our immune system to? Are we really taking it seriously, and are we really supporting it? I think the answer is no. I mean, in terms of the global vaccination program, in my mind, are we helping, or is global vaccination making things worse? Are we deepening the problem by depleting our natural immune system? I think we are. So overall, you know, in terms of one-dimensional medicine, are we sawing off the branch that we're sitting on? Are we swapping sort of symptomatic fast relief for long-term damage to our natural immune defense systems? So is modern medicine, is modern pharmaceutical one-dimensional medicine sustainable? I don't think it is. Second issue of sustainability is Propolis providing the honeybee with its sustainability? Well, I think the clue's in the name, isn't it? Pro before polis, the city. Propolis is the defender of the city. It stands before the city in so many ways. The bees collect the resins, which are affected with the plant's immune defense mechanism. They transform and rearrange the chemical relationship of of those resins, and by adding wax as well. And they elevate that whole material, that thing that becomes propolis, into the honeybee's own immune system. And we've heard from Marla Spivak's team many times how propolis is fulfilling that function for the honeybee in the hive. So propolis is providing a three-dimensional defense system for the honeybee too. Physical in its structural capacity, social in terms of its hygienic capacity, and sort of existential, or rather inner, in its adaptogenic function, in the way in which it operates as an antibiotic or anti-inflammatory or so on. So what the honeybee is doing, it's collecting what is appropriate, what's relevant, what is related to it, what is local, what it is necessary to sustain its existence, to develop its ability to sustain itself. How exactly it does this, why it manages to choose these things, we're not entirely sure. And this is not the place to speculate on that just at the moment. The reality, of course, is that propolis or not, the honeybee is under huge pressure. Colony collapse disorder is the kind of worst example of the problems that honeybees are facing, because also called the Marie-Celeste syndrome, because the bees are leaving hives apparently full of food, full of brood, and are basically disappearing. And what's happening is that the superorganism that is the honeybee, something that those features which hold the superorganism together, the kind of glue that holds the organism together, is snapping. The rubber band is snapping, it's being stretched, and so to speak, the cybernetic of the honeybee is disappearing. So yeah, propolis is vitally important to the sustainability of the honeybee, but it's not the only thing. It can't do it alone. So the third category is propolis a sustainable medicine for man? Well, the honeybee has, for eons of time, had an extraordinary relationship with human beings. The best example of this, but it's repeated around the world. In the temple at Ephesus in Greek times, the priestesses were called Melissa. The bees were a symbol of higher knowledge, and the priests were called Essene, or king bees. And the honeybee was the focus of the mystery schools. The mystery schools being schools where the neophytes sought knowledge and information about the presence and existence of a higher world. And it was the priests who became the doctors, and honeybee products have been used throughout the ancient times as a medicine. Babylonian, Egyptian, Hebrews, the Arabs, the Romans, and so on used propolis. And I want to quote at this point Rudolf Steiner from his 9 lectures on bees. He said something very, I think, always very inspiring about the honeybee. He said, whoever looks at a beehive should actually say, with an exalted mind, making this detour by way of the beehive, the entire cosmos can find its way into human beings and help to make them sound in body and mind. I'd like us to bear that idea in mind, because it brings us back to this kind of not one-dimensional, but highly complex, three-dimensional view of medicine which is sustainable medicine. The medicine that Hippocrates described as an art. which is a combination of the physical, the social, and the spiritual. Now, propolis has been explored as a medicine extensively since during the scientific age by many people, but it's all been explored in that kind of one-dimensional way in terms of its anti-properties. If you remember our earlier discussion about the difference between those pro-medicines and the anti-medicines. And of course, we've discovered in propolis many different sorts of anti-properties, great list of anti-properties. And much of this early scientific research went on in Eastern Europe, and we have a great deal to thank the Russians and the Bulgarians and other Eastern European countries for the tremendous amount of work that was done in pioneering the scientific understanding of propolis. Now, a little bit of research that a colleague of mine did back in the mid-90s. It was showing, and you can still see that scientific publications between 1980 and 1995 still very much dominated by the Eastern Europeans, although they're beginning to be interested in propolis in the US and some in Europe and the UK. And, you know, that scientific work I tried to put together in my book published in 2001. And sure enough, we found that propolis did have all these many pharmacological properties. But in all the work that I looked at in 2001, it was clear that nobody was able to identify what we've come to know as sort of key active ingredients that from which we might be able to synthesize a traditional orthodox one-dimensional medicine. Instead, what we found is that propolis, instead of being a destroyer, instead of it being a sort of having a kind of killer quality, targeted inhibition of a particular problem, it has much more of a disabler quality. So it disables the inflammatory process, it disrupts the allergic response, it disconnects bacteria by disarming the quorum sensors, it discriminates between good bacteria and bad bacteria, and it disarms viruses by sealing them in rather than by destroying them. And I just want to talk very briefly about the Baccharis story. Baccharis, of course, very well known in Brazil, because here's a plant that grew in the polluted soil in Minas Gerais, which had been polluted by mineral mining and had to overcome, so to speak, a cancerous environment. The plant did this by generating very large resin glands in its buds, and the bees loved it. And the bees bite down into those buds, they take those buds, and that resin becomes the raw material for the propolis in that area. And of course, researchers looking at the value of that propolis for human beings found that it had strong cytotoxic properties and could be a real support for people treating cancer. I think this is one of the stories that affected me most in my journey of understanding propolis. And as it happens, I think much of the research that we've done at Be Vital and at the Ipsilocal Research Centre has focused on this element. So, for instance, and I've come to call it geographic medicine. It might be a bit premature, but I think more research is needed. But I think we're really onto something here in terms of the relationship between the propolis from a particular area and its medicinal function. So we discovered early on that the relationship between the antibiotic properties of propolis and climate. So where it's hot and wet, i.e. where the bee is challenged much more by bacteria, then the propolis is more antibiotic. But what was most interesting was that we found in an area where there was sleeping sickness in the population, I think it was in the South Cameroon, we found there was an anti-trypanosome chemical. So in a way, what we came to imagine was that, at least what I came to imagine in my rather vivid imagination is that basically that the bee is collecting the sort of health, the environmental health signature of its surrounding, and it's incorporating that signature into its own immune system. So it's taking the plant's immune defense response and it's incorporating it in its immune response. And over a number of years collecting information about the chemical and biological properties of propolis from different areas, you know, the picture is emerging, for example, that in the temperate zones, the propolis is dominated more by flavonoids and has a stronger antioxidant activity, whereas in subtropical zones, the propolis is dominated by phenolics and has a stronger antimicrobial. So there's that relationship between climate, chemistry, and biology. So between the local and the biological. So we developed a program out of this sort of insight, and we went to 5 African countries and looked at this whole premise of we looked at leishmania, malaria, and trypanosomiasis to see whether we could find. In fact, we came back with the knowledge that we needed to do more. But in a sense, what we discovered is that there's that local propolis has very specific properties which are related, they're appropriate, they have this balancing function, they do no harm, they do not compromise the long term. And in a way, they have everything which adds up to this concept of sustainability, to the ability of the process or organism to sustain itself. And geographic medicine, you know, contains all of these things. We might want to call it sustainable medicine. We might want to call it 3-dimensional medicines or immune support medicine. It's adaptogenic medicine. It's holistic medicine. Maybe it's ecological medicine. So there's been a huge increase in published research about propolis since the late 90s, and certainly since I started researching in the beginning of the 90s. But taking data from 1998 to 2022, you see that in 1998 there were 10 papers published, but in 2022, the projected number will be in excess of 1,000. And you can see how, as we get towards how the rate of increase is absolutely rocketing in the last few years. And the interesting thing that many of these papers refer to and are related to antibiotic resistance. And, you know, this figure, again, the projected figure for 2022 is likely to be in the region of 300, which, if you go back to the total number of papers, is getting on for 1/3 of the papers seem to be concerned at some level or other with antibiotic resistance. I put these papers in because I think it gives a very powerful indication of where we're going with propolis and of how the potential of propolis has been seen. So I think it's plain for me to see that propolis is a sustainable medicine in itself, in terms of its ability to support and to sustain the ecosystem of our body. But I'm keen, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not throw the pharmaceutical baby out with the bathwater. And my instinct is can we combine the targeted pharmaceutical medicines with the sustainable and the balancing, the adaptogenic qualities of the natural products, and particularly apaceuticals and propolis? Well, I think last year's conference and to an extent this year's conference illustrates the fact that there is this opportunity. So last year, for example, the clinical research from Brazil illustrated how COVID, when treated with orthodox treatments plus propolis, reduced hospital time by half. Wonderful example of the working together of the two forms of medicine, and research that we have been undertaking with our partners at Leeds Beckett University, for example, is showing that propolis combined with antibiotics is able to restore the efficacy of antibiotics that have become redundant, like penicillin. I think this is a tremendously exciting area, and potentially the area that we need to be working at most. So in conclusion to this element of the sustainability journey, should we be building bridges? Should we be working to create a bridge from pharmaceutical medicine to what I'm calling ecoceutical medicine, to medicine which is threefold, to medicine which is based on working with and for our immune system, a new kind of medicine, but a medicine which takes the values of both, but in a sense returns to the roots of medicine. Finally, if propolis becomes a sustainable medicine for human beings, what's going to happen to the honeybee? Is it going to be sustainable for the honeybee? Well, the honeybee is already under massive pressure. We know this from colony collapse disorder. We also know that whilst the reasons for colony collapse disorder are referred to as being multi-causational, the reality is it's about the way we treat the honeybee. And it's about the commodification of the honeybee, and it's about over-commercialization. So if there's an increased demand for propolis, what's that going to happen? You know, how is it going to increase factory farming? Is it going to increase artificial stressing of bees, the genetic modification, and taking too much propolis in too inappropriate way from the honeybee? We can try setting standards to help that, and the ISO standards committee, which many of our IPRG board are involved in, it's been trying to do that, but the standards so far will only relate to the most commercially important forms of raw propolis. They will not be, for instance, relating primarily to issues of origin and provenance. They won't be talking about good beekeeping practices, and they won't in a certain sense be addressing the question we're addressing here, which is that of sustainability. So the question is, what would help? Well, I think we have to go back to basics. And one of the things that also struck me was do we have to reimagine what healthy bees are like? We've got so used to keeping them in a certain condition, and so used to kind of a declining sense of their health that we have to treat for this and that. Most of you will have heard about the discovery in the UK very recently of a sort of ecotype of bee, the traditional English black bee, which, guess what, doesn't have the same number of problems. It lives very high up in trees, and it has survived for hundreds of years without the classic diseases that modern commercialized bees have. So I think we need to bear that in mind. If we're looking at the science, we need to think, well, what is it that can help bees be sustainable? But I think part of that explanation is that part of what we have to do is also we have to stop treating the honeybee as if it's a commodity. And I've been very touched by the work of Horst Kornberger in a book called The Global Hive. And he puts his finger on it. He says, it's hard to have an emotional relationship with a chemical formula. And there's nothing sacred about a genome. When all regard is lost, nature becomes a commodity. The beehive becomes a factory, and the bee queen a genetic machine. He goes on to say, the loss of pollinators is an issue that should be addressed, not just in a scientific manner, but also acknowledges the way we perceive, the way we feel, and the way we act in response to these issues. So in a way, he's making the case for a compassionate ecology. And I think if we can develop geographic medicine, I think that can help too, because by choosing medicines which have a very specific provenance, which are specific to local areas, which have a specific chemical biological content, so we inevitably improve the sustainability and our ability to measure and monitor and control quality. We need to support organizations that incorporate research sustainability into their programs, and the Apiceutical Research Centre, which I set up 11 years ago now, does just that, as well as supporting those organizations that are working with the medicinal properties of bee products. Apimondia, of course, the International Federation of Apitherapists, the newly formed Global Bee Medicine Group, and of course the IPRG. And I can't leave without reminding you about my own personal bee art project. We're looking to build a major discovery centre in North Yorkshire, but it will be more than a discovery centre inspired by the honeybee. It will be a research centre, and it will be a model of a sustainable community. I feel we can learn so much from the honeybee. And here's a model of the outline and the discovery centre, and an artist's impression of what the centre will look like. Finally, I have to say that we also need to support the businesses, the businesses who sponsored and supported this conference. But these are businesses, these are businesses of a new era, because they're businesses that are not only supporting us financially, but they're businesses committed to novel research and the development of sustainable beekeeping. And we have to recognize the work that they're doing, recognize the commitment they have made, recognizing that they are bucking the trend of commerce in moving away from total exploitation and into a position of managed support for the products which they're developing and marketing. And that brings me to the end. I want to thank first and foremost the honeybee that has inspired me so much over the last 35 years now, and I want to thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.